How do and welcome back. My name is Andrew Hancock and I'm a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with the VMware products since their inception in 1998, so that's 23 years I've been working with the VMware product line. Some of you may say if you cut Andy in half it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool. I've also written over 100 articles for Experts Exchange and won many other awards and accolades. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program for the last 11 years and more recently a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 2. Hi and welcome back, and in the next VMware or Hancock's VMware half hour I'm going to show you how to create your first Linux virtual machine on VMware vSphere Hypervisor 7. This is actually on the Dell PowerEdge R730 that we've been using in this series so far. And you may remember from part, where are we, 6, 7? Part 6 and 7, the first virtual machine that we created happened to be our Windows Server 2019. The ISO, remember, that we'd uploaded to our ISOs folder on our data store from part 4. Well, now basically we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use that Ubuntu ISO that I uploaded previously, and we're going to go through and we're going to install Ubuntu 2004 LTS Desktop Edition. Now this is actually a lot easier. I was actually basically looking through the archives, and I will put this article in the steps in the description so that you can actually basically follow some original written material step by step with tutorials. But as I was digging around in the archive, I actually did come across a very, very old, this article is almost 10 years old next year. This was written in 2012, and this was actually based on installing Ubuntu Server 11.10 LTS 32-bit edition. And in them days, things were a little bit more difficult in installing VMware tools, because VMware tools were not supplied as a package. They were supplied as source code, which basically meant that you had to compile the source code for your virtual machine. And believe you me, in those days, 9 years ago, things were a little bit more tricky than just installing a package today. But that's VMware tools for Linux that we'll come on to in part 10. I think this is part 9. I'm losing the track with all these parts. But anyway, this is the next in the series. We'll install Ubuntu desktop today, and I'll then basically do another short video on how we actually install VMware tools for it. And I'll refer back to this older tutorial again. If you're interested, I'll put this in the steps as well. So quickly, we touched on this before. We can go to the VMware compatibility guide. That link's in my article. And we can actually basically check the vendor, we can check the OS release, and we can actually basically check to see that it is actually supported. So therefore we know that there shouldn't be any issues with Ubuntu 20.04 on our ESXi 7.0 U2 server. So I'm going to go to my browser, and I'm just going to big X that, we don't need that. So I'm going to go back to my browser. I already have a connection to my host server. There's my first Windows virtual machine that's all nicely booted, and we're going to use that more in these videos as well. So we want to create a new virtual machine. In fact, it's very, very similar to what we've already covered for Windows. So if you're following me, you would have seen this before. Create a new virtual machine. We click next. I'm basically going to turn around and say my first, if I can spell, my first Linux virtual machine. And I'm actually basically using dashes rather than spaces. As I said, it becomes a lot easier to manipulate folders and files if you've got dashes in them rather than if you've got spaces, because then you need to start putting quotes around things. Our virtual machine hardware version, we want it to be ESXi 7.0 U2 and compatible. The guest OS family is Linux, and we're going to scroll down and we're going to pick Ubuntu Linux 64-bit. Doesn't matter what version, the configuration container that it's going to create should be compatible for all versions of Linux, older versions of Linux, and click next. We're going to use our Flash data store, the data store that we created in part 2, and I'm going to click next. And this is now where we now actually basically start selecting CPUs and memory. Now obviously Linux is a lot smaller footprint than Windows, but still I'm going to basically turn around and say, well, I'm going to give it a 30 gig disk. I'm going to actually up the memory a bit. I'm going to put in 2 gig. Now from previous experience I have noticed that Ubuntu 2004 unfortunately is starting to get a little bit more CPU hungry, and I have actually installed it before with 1 CPU, and the initialization at the beginning with the installer is very slow. So I'm going to give it 2 CPUs, 2 vCPUs, and of course that is going to be 2 cores times 1 socket, and I'm going to click next. One other thing I'm actually going to check that I like to do today is I'm actually going to attach that CD-ROM ISO file now as part of, so I don't have to do it later or edit it later. So I'm just going to select, there's our Ubuntu server, there's our DVD. I'm going to click next, and I'm going to click finish. One of the other things I'm going to do is that's our Linux version there. I'm actually just going to edit the settings, because what I want to do is I actually want to change the boot options from BIOS to EFI or UEFI. Now you may notice there that it did actually basically turn around and say that, you know, it may not be bootable. I actually know that the actual media that I've got is UEFI compliant, and I'm basically going to hit the power on button, and there we go. We've got our options. If I just get the focus, install Ubuntu server. So again, if you've actually basically installed this on a physical machine, it's exactly the same procedure. It's no different at all. So I'm just going to wait for that to boot. Oh, I'd also like to mention, because somebody keeps going on about my t-shirts. So today I'm actually basically wearing an older Experts Exchange t-shirt. As you can tell, this one is subtly different. It's black, and on the back, I'll do a twirl for you, and it's got the words wizard. I'll come back round again. So this is an older Exchange t-shirt. I think this dates back probably to when I started answering questions on Experts Exchange, probably in about 2010, 2011, so a lifetime ago. Anyway, okay, so GUI based or non-GUI based install, text based installer, which you'll be familiar with if you've installed server before. So yes, English UK, continue, also updates the new installer. It's always worth doing this because there are occasionally issues sometime with the Ubuntu installers that don't play very well. So I'm just going to change the layout again to English UK, and I'm going to select done and apply config. Yeah, I'm happy at the moment with the networking. Now, one of the big differences between Windows and many Linux-based distributions is they have already in them the vMXNet3 Ethernet controller driver. So there's none of this rip and replace swap-C that we have with Windows, and the reason we do that is because Microsoft Windows does not contain the vMXNet3 driver. So I'm going to click done. We don't use any proxy here, we have direct access to the internet. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to basically say use entire disk. You may have other specific requirements, and I'm going to basically say done. I'm completely happy with that partition layer. I'm just going to hit done, and yeah, this will begin the installation process. And it's now asking me for my name, so obviously to create the account. So I'm just going to basically Andrew Hancock, server name, we'll call it I'll call it Ubuntu server. Pick a username, so I'll just basically call myself Hancock A, and I'll just create a complex password, and that does not match. I think that was right, and done. I'm going to install Open SSH Server. I don't really want to install any of these at the moment, but I could if I had a requirement. And I'm going to click done, and I'm going to say view log, and we can actually basically see it start basically to do the heavy lifting and starting to actually install Ubuntu. So that's really about it. There isn't really anything more to say other than just watch it. And again, the same thing, you know, like you really only have to do this once, because if you do it once and you set up what we like to call a golden master or a golden template, then once you've got that template, you can then basically just deploy that template from vCenter Server in the future, or I can show you a couple of other tips in another video coming soon on how we can copy and paste virtual machines if you're not if you don't have a license for vCenter Server. So I'm just going to walk away and let this continue, and I'll come back and finalize the installation. And I'll speed this up in the post. Okay, I'm back. That actually took a lot longer than what I thought it was going to. I think that installation of Ubuntu server, not desktop, I made a little bit of a mistake there, a bit of a boo-boo. Anyway, that took a little bit longer than I actually suspected. I think that was much longer than the installation for Windows. So long, in fact, that the host client has actually basically exited, and just let me log back in, and we can carry on. So my first Linux virtual machine, and that's where we left off. Okay, so I'm going to select close, and that's now basically waiting for us to hit the reboot. So I'm going to say reboot. Okay, so it's actually basically telling me to remove the CD-ROM. So you may remember that I actually sort of kind of mentioned about disconnecting the CD-ROM from virtual machines once you're done. So in fact, actually, it has actually dismounted the CD already because it's no longer connected. So I'm just going to basically hit enter there. Make sure that I've got focus, and I'm just going to basically hit enter, and I'm going to wait for that basically to boot up. Whilst that's booting up, I've got something to show you here. Rummaging around in my office, and I thought I'd actually basically dust off and show you one of the very first Experts Exchange awards that I won as Expert of the Year in 2011. So that sits on my shelf with all my other other awards and trophies. And just to let you know, because you're probably thinking, what on earth is that? I believe that this actually is a casting mold or casting of the first hard disk that had the first question posted on it and answered at Experts Exchange. So that's what that actually is. It's a very, very heavy metal trophy. There are a few of those around the world, rare now. The experts like me have won. The awards are a little bit different these days. Okay, so our virtual machine is booting, and once it's booted, I'm just going to quickly log in, and I'm just going to perform an update task to show you that we do actually basically have some networking. You can see that Ubuntu server and the IP address is listed there, and it's actually basically telling us that VMware Tools is not managed by vSphere. Now, in later versions of Ubuntu, OpenVM Tools is actually already installed as one of the packages, because it knows that it's a VMware virtual machine, so automatically installs the Open VMware Tools, so we don't have to actually basically do anything. Now that could be, yeah, okay. I did think that the login there was right at the bottom of the screen and you couldn't just see it. So anyway, I'm just going to log in with the password. Oh. Fat fingers on the keyboard. Okay. So just to check that I've actually got some networking, I'm going to do a sudo apt get updates update, you know, and if you're familiar with Linux, Ubuntu Linux, like I am, of course, basically if you issue a sudo apt-get update, it's the equivalent of hitting the check update button in a Windows box. It'll go off basically and update the local cache repository, and then basically if you do a sudo space apt-get upgrade, it will go off and drag the updates down from the internet for you as well, and it's obviously basically doing that as I speak. So that's it. How we install our first Linux virtual machine Ubuntu server on our ESXi 7.0.2a or 7.0U2a host. Nothing more for me to say. Once again, thanks so much for joining me. Come back in the next part and we'll show you how to install VMware Tools. All the best now. Take care. Bye bye.